All right, ladies and gentlemen, MrSotko here. Welcome back to the channel. And today I got something a little bit different and a little bit interesting to talk about, and that is predicting the Bitcoin mining fee flippening. And that's going to be a little bit vague at first, and maybe this isn't so much of a prediction as just more of a discussion. So keep this in your mind and think about it for a little while, as I think it's kind of interesting and nobody ever really talks about it. So what do I mean by the Bitcoin mining fee flippening? Well, I'm not talking about like Ethereum flipping Bitcoin or XRP flipping Ethereum, that sort of thing. I'm talking about when the mining fee exceeds the actual rewards of mining, or the coinbase reward of Bitcoin. No, not like the exchange. So what I mean is that in the entire block, the total reward that goes out to all of the miners will eventually be higher than the daily or even the block reward itself over time. So you would think that over time, the fees of Bitcoin are going to get higher and higher and higher. As you can see here, in December 2017, we saw the highest fees of Bitcoin. They were absolutely outrageous, but just remember that was sort of a fake thing. Let's actually take a look at that, where the average fees were anywhere from $20 upwards to $55 per transaction. And again, that was a little bit a mix of manipulation and just poor planning. And let me tell you some of those reasons. So one of the big reasons was Bitmain, was flooding the Bitcoin network with little tiny transactions. And that was to make Bitcoin look worse and Bitcoin Cash look even better. Because look at how low our fees are. Look at Bitcoin's incredibly high fees. And, well, it did work for some people, that strategy. And you might think to yourself, wouldn't you lose a lot of money doing that? Well, but if you're one of the biggest miners in the world like Bitmain, you're actually getting a lot of that back. So if you're spending so much, spamming the transactions, over the network, even if you're just sending it to yourself, essentially, yeah, sure, you're going to be paying these fees, but again, you're going to be getting 50% plus of them back to yourself. So it's only a small loss to make your other product look good. Another reason that Bitcoin fees were so high was not everybody had implemented SegWit at that time. It had only came out like a few months before that, and it was your job to, especially if you were an exchange or something like that, to run a SegWit node. Now you can choose to not run a SegWit node and just run the old, and it still works just fine. But SegWit is significantly cheaper, as we could just see right here. It's significantly cheaper. Another thing is that wallets weren't so good. They weren't as good then at their fees. And another big thing about that time was that exchanges weren't batching properly, just in the same way that Visa and MasterCard and basically everything else does. They get a bunch of transactions at once and then send them out, instead of sending out every individual little transaction to everybody. Instead, an exchange can just essentially hold up a bunch of Bitcoin and not actually do the individual transactions, but try to get a bunch at once and then send it all out at once to all the different addresses. And that's a lot cheaper. And they weren't doing that. In fact, Coinbase even admitted that they weren't batching well, and they admitted that they weren't using SegWit either. So Coinbase was a part of that as well. And now we're seeing fairly low fees. We're talking 60 cents, 30 cents to send, upwards of pretty much however much you want, which is incredibly cheap. And I would argue that even just a few dollars here in July 2019, when we were having quite a bit of volume. But again, the most volume we have is now, yet we have these super low fees. So what is the Bitcoin mining fee exactly? So let's take a look at a couple recent blocks. And these are just two random blocks I pulled. And then I pulled two blocks from back in December 2017. And we'll see the difference. So again, they wildly vary. in that the fee reward for all miners, you can see the block reward, the Coinbase reward is always 12.5. So if you're a miner, you always set your reward to 12.5, and that's what you get. And then you also get the fee reward. So these are all people sending transactions, and in that 10-minute period, it all added up to 0.2 Bitcoin, which on average is actually quite a bit for this particular block. So you can see that 0.277 Bitcoin there. Let's round that a little bit there. And then this one is 0.19. We can even go through and just pull even more random ones up. If you just pull just a random one here, you can see it's 0.15. Sometimes they're less than that, and they're 0.015 or something like that. So that's about where they are on average. We could just pull up another one here and see it was 0.2. So the fees are actually pretty high at the moment. I was actually looking at some of the random blocks last night, and they were 0.0 something or other, whether it was 0.04, 0.05. And that's about what it is. So now going back to December 2017, we can see a big difference here. This is actually the 17th of December 2017. And this is approximately when the highest prices of Bitcoin were, and the highest fees were as well. We can see 1.82 Bitcoin. So the reward from mining is 12.5, but you can see that it's actually a lot higher than that, what actually goes out to everybody. And of course, 12.5 doesn't go out to just one person. It'll usually go out to a pool who had found it, and then it goes out to everybody within that pool who has ASICs connected to it, etc. Rarely anymore does anybody ever get a full block to themselves unless you have an entire warehouse filled to the brim with ASICs and you let it run for a month or two, and then you might get your own block. And even then, it'll probably still take a few months. So your operation, you're going to be in the hole for $10,000 plus electricity by the time you find a block. So again, it goes out to everybody. And so instead of 12.5 going out, it was more like, 13 point something or other, or 14.3 BTC, what have you. And then this block here, was 2.71 Bitcoin. So quite a bit. And so if we go to and look at the long-term supply of Bitcoin, we start to understand what I'm talking about here is that these rewards are really high. And the fee rewards now don't look so high. Back then they did because of all the reasons I had stated before, probably even more as well. And you have to think to yourself too, the volume was not as high in December. So you can't say that, everybody was using Bitcoin, so the price was really high, which is just not true. You can see the volume here, and it's not even remotely as high as it is in 2019. 2019 is the highest volume we've ever seen. So there were a lot of nefarious reasons, or just reasons of neglect, that the Bitcoin mining fees were so high, and transaction fees. So if you take a look here at this chart, I really love looking at this chart. It's truly fascinating. The first reward era of Bitcoin, when it came out, like 2009, everybody was getting 50 Bitcoin per block. And so the total BTC added in that time was 10,500,000. So the vast majority, half, not the vast, but half, 50% of all Bitcoin was created in the first 4 years. In the next 4 years, up to 2016, it was 25 per block, only creating 5.25 million Bitcoin. So an increase in 50%. And the total Bitcoin supply at that point would be 75% in just the first, essentially in the first 8 years of Bitcoin. And you can see it drops dramatically. We go from 50, 25, 12.5, 6.25, 3.12, 1.56, and then 0.78. By the seventh reward era, we are actually less than 1 Bitcoin. So the idea then is that the miners will be even more valuable than they are now, because the reward, and that's the every 10 minutes. So that's every 10 minutes. So in that entire 4-year period, we're only actually going to make 164,000 BTC. And if you scroll down a little bit, eventually you get down, like let's say we're in the 20th era, you get 0.00009536. You only get 9,536 Satoshis per block. So in the entire 4-year period, you're only going to make 20 Bitcoin in 4 years. That's not in a day. That's not in a year. That's 4 years. You're only going to make 20 Bitcoin. And it gets even worse all the way to the 34th era, where effectively you're making absolutely nothing. In the 33rd era, you're only making 1 Satoshi per block every 10 minutes. So in that entire 4-year period, you literally only make 210,000 Satoshis approximately. So eventually, the fee actually exceeds the Coinbase reward of Bitcoin. And I would say that you could argue that starts anywhere from the 6th era of Bitcoin at 1.56 Bitcoin per block reward to probably, even the 13th era of Bitcoin, somewhere around there. The fee will actually flip the reward. So people using Bitcoin out in the world will actually give more Bitcoin in fees to the miners than they will with the actual block reward. So at that point, a miner isn't necessarily hoping for these Satoshis every 10 minutes. And also, if you think about it, if you're only receiving 149 Satoshis, like as it says in the 26th era here, you're only getting 149 Satoshis per block. Now, that is 149 Satoshis given out to everybody in that pool. So if you're connected to a pool, and mind you, that's a long ways away from now, something 80 plus years from now. But if you're mining in a pool, that all has to be distributed equally based on your hash rate. So let's say everybody is relatively equal. There's probably more than 149 people in any given somewhat major pool that would actually find a block reward. So you're effectively only going to get a Satoshi or two with everybody in that pool. So at some point, Bitcoin will eventually have to possibly add additional digits, which it is possible to do that in Bitcoin. You just have to change the code just a little bit, and then everybody would have to run that iteration of Bitcoin. And it would still be Bitcoin, but you would just put extra digits on the Satoshi. So instead of just having 8 digits, you could have upwards of 16, perhaps even more. Like Ethereum does. Ethereum tokens can have anywhere from just 1 integer to 0.16 with 0 15s and a 1 on the end. So it's interesting to think about how much would a Satoshi be at that point. And there's a conundrum here as well, because you figure, oh, well, a Satoshi has to be worth a lot of money at that point. Well, here's the thing with that. If 1 Satoshi equaled 1 penny, Bitcoin would be worth $1 million. And so 149 pennies isn't worth anything at all. So again, you would have to be relying at that point on the mining fees. And at that point, the mining fees would be borderline, miners would be borderline a government asset at that point, under protection. Because if miners went down, then the world economy would be hurt pretty badly if 1 Satoshi equals 1 penny, $1 million Bitcoin. At that point, we would rely on those payments as a planet because the market cap would be so large with $1 million Bitcoin. And at $10 million Bitcoin, each Satoshi is a dime. At $100 million Bitcoin, each Satoshi, $1. So at that point, it would be a huge security risk to have mining centers actually disrupted because it is worth so much money. So if one Satoshi was a penny, 149 cents, $1.49 is worth nothing. And I would even argue at that point that, even one Bitcoin split between all the people, $1 million, even if it was if Bitcoin was $1 million and you split, 0.1 between everybody, you're splitting $100,000 at a time, it would have to be something like $1 million. So it's interesting to think how expensive it would be to spend Bitcoin at that point. Now, if you have to spend thousands of Satoshis to send a transaction, that would mean that transactions would have to be less than 100 Satoshis. Otherwise, you'd be spending $1 every time you spend $1 with Bitcoin. Those would be pretty high fees. Now, $1 isn't really that much. Sometimes we see that in Bitcoin. We could see it, in October of 2019. We had a, 1.44, $1.44 average. But nobody likes that. People want it less than $1. So that would mean that each individual fee would have to be something like 18 Satoshis or 37 Satoshis given to the miners. If Bitcoin was $1 million. And if the miners got something like this looks like about an average miner fee at the moment. These do. So 0.0488 or 0.097 or 0.195. Those are about the average miner fees at the moment, or the fee reward for the whole block, that is. As you can see here, this one's 0.227 or 277. And, they get less than that. They get less than, 0.01, etc. And so it's interesting to think about at what point will the miner fee flip and what price would Bitcoin have to be? And if Bitcoin is very, very, very expensive, then that would mean it would be very difficult to actually use at that point. So the price has to go up, yet the fees have to go way down at the same time. So at some point in the future, and I would imagine that it's somewhere between the 9th reward era and something maybe along to close to the 14th or the 13th, somewhere around here, there's going to be a mining fee flippening, where this block reward is actually going to be dwarfed by the fee reward itself. And you can see even in the 9th era, that is a possibility. Even in the 6th era, that is technically a possibility, but I don't think a 2017 will ever happen again, because this is 2.71 Bitcoin back in December 2017, and this was this December 2017 one was 1.8 Bitcoin, which I don't think that will happen again. Excuse me, because wallets are better. SegWit has lowered that a lot. Exchanges batch better. Bitmain stopped its attack on Bitcoin for now. They must have ran out of money. So I don't think we'll see that again. But what we are seeing is something more like along the lines of the 9th era, which every 4 years, so that's 4 years. So essentially, something along the lines of 38 years or so, 30, somewhere around there, 36 years into Bitcoin, we should see this. So 2009, 36, so maybe 2045 or so, somewhere around there. Again, it's hard to predict the exact year, but 2045, 2000 to 2050 to 2055, somewhere around there. In that 10-year period, we should see a flippening of the mining fee of Bitcoin. And that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I just sort of wanted to postulate that idea to everybody, as I don't really see it ever really being talked about. Like, when are the mining fees actually going to flip the block reward itself? And I'm going to have to go with in about 25 years. In about 30 years, we should see that. We need a few more halvenings. We're only in the third era now. So we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at least more halvenings, which is like 36 years into the future. Or no, 24, at least 24 years into the future. But I would go with, somewhere between 2045 or so to 2055, depending on the exact year of the flippenings. I'm not sure if that's on here or not, this chart, and I don't feel like adding 4 every time, but so it might not be exactly like 2045. There might not be a flippening till like 46, as it is in 4s anyway. But that's all I have for you guys. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know what you think will happen when the fee flips. Is Bitcoin going to be an absurd price? And if it is an absurd price, are the fees for the average user going to be too high? And if it is too high, or the price is too high but the fees are too low, and the block reward starts going down too much, and the fee and essentially the price isn't going up too much, are miners going to capitulate in mass because it's just not worth their time? Once this block reward gets too low, they are relying on transaction fees at that point to continue their operations. So are they going to have to downscale or upscale? Who knows? Because again, when you are only receiving 1,192 satoshis per block, and mind you, that's not going out to one miner; it's going out to every miner in the pool, being split between 1,192 satoshis. That means that even if Bitcoin is at $1 million, that's still only like what, $11 in Bitcoin. So at that point, for sure, either Bitcoin has to be well above $1 million, or the mining fees have to be much, much higher, something like they are today, like we're seeing 0.2 Bitcoin. Then you're talking quite a bit of money. Then you're talking several $100,000 per block, something equivalent to what we're seeing today. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that good stuff. My social media in the description below. Follow that if you get the opportunity. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And as usual, I will see you guys next time.